Bioshock Infinite was released in 2013 as a sequel to the 2007 game Bioshock, and was written by Ken Levine and developed by Irrational Games. In the years following Bioshock Infinite's release, it has been praised as one of the best first-person shooters of the last console generation, mainly for its unique adrenaline-filled gameplay, beautiful presentation and art direction, themes criticising the expansion of the American frontier, and most importantly, the story. I could tell you more about the game's development, but I think I'd rather just come right out and tell you what I think and go from there, because according to my YouTube analytics, most of you don't watch past this point. Despite Bioshock Infinite's highs being very high, its lows are so subnautically low, which I admit is a bit hyperbolic for me to say, but my god does this game have flaws aplenty. A multiverse of flaws, if you will. Most of these issues I have lie in the story. One that at points had me gripped, engaged and fascinated, but other points left me confused, bored and strangely angry. Before I fully eject my barber chair into this little thing, let me first tell you where I stand on Bioshock for the sake of context. The original Bioshock is one of my favourite games ever. It boasts the incredible setting of an underwater city ran by a flawed political ideology.
I call it objectivism.
Has incredible art direction which oozes with character and style, has many great science fiction elements mixed in as well. A society with superpowers, big hulking Frankensteins and divers outfits defending little girls which are basically living stem cells, and finally a fantastic story with many epic twists and turns that is full of so many great plot elements and themes as well as symbolism. However, it's not what I'd call flawless. The story takes a bit of a narrative dive after the second act. Some aspects of the gameplay tend to get a bit tedious, there were notable shortcuts taken with the appearances of some of the characters, and the ending just sucks. But we'll get to that soon, my impatient little gamers. But regardless, I love Bioshock, and I adore the world Ken Levine created. So after playing Bioshock, I moved straight to Bioshock Infinite, and it ain't great. Firstly, let me express some of the things I really like about Bioshock Infinite. The idea of the game I adore. I really like wacky science fiction shit, and the idea of a floating city populated by ultra-nationalist Christians that has cheeky sprinklings of multiverse theory really tickles me.
What is a tear?
It's like a window. A window to another world. Most of the time they're dull as dishwater, a different colored towel or tea instead of coffee. But sometimes I see something amazing.
And at points it really does take advantage of the concepts at play in great ways. I really like the interdimensional tear system, and I think it works great for narrative as well as gameplay. The skyhook system is also pretty cool. It seems to have a practical purpose in the game's universe, which makes for pretty good world building. Combat's very fun. It will never cease to amuse me whenever I jump off a skyline, levitate enemies with my vigors, and then ass blast them away with a shotgun. I like it, and as I previously mentioned, the tear system really complements this. Elizabeth and Booker I really like. Elizabeth's arc and progression throughout the game, from Disney Princess number 337 to traumatized demigod, was kinda cool. I really like her character design, and all of the work put into making her character likeable really paid off.
No, she's got it. She just needs to fucking focus. Don't fucking laugh!
Okay, you were right. I can't control it. It's not possible.
With what I've seen lately, I wouldn't put a nickel on what's possible. Now, come on. I think it's time we found Comstock, okay?
Can we do it once more?
Yeah, that's good. That's good.
Will you yell, you fucking psychopath? Will you scream at me a little more? And then be nice?
Her motion capture is consistently great and gets across a lot of unique characterization. Courtney Draper did a fantastic job with her voice work, and I could not imagine anyone better suited to play her. Booker is also a good protagonist. His personality and dialogue, along with Troy Baker's voice performance, really sells his character as kind of a Han Solo roguish type, who also has a dark past that's hinted throughout the game. The story also has its moments involving Elizabeth and her progression, as well as parts of the ending really had me invested, and despite the game taking place from a consistent first-person perspective, the game does throw in brilliant cinematography and unique visual set pieces. Also, the music is gorgeous thanks to the wonderful Gary Scheinman, who returns from Bioshock 1 and 2 to deliver beautiful music that completely makes most cutscenes. One of my favourites is probably Elizabeth's theme. It perfectly captures her character and is used incredibly effectively in cutscenes. In addition to its great original soundtrack, some of which you can hear now, the game uses the multiverse angles to create 1912 covers of modern songs that are implemented effectively and sound pretty great. We got barbershop quartets of God Only Knows, and fairground music of Girls Just Wanna Have Fun. So right now you're probably thinking to yourself, Will, you disgusting, fat, sweaty gremlin! You've just listed a ton of major positives, so how come this game is flawed? Have you clickbaited us? No. No, I haven't. I'm going to be negative now. The barber chair has ascended, and now it's going to descend. With this section, I want to establish that throughout this entire review, I will be comparing Infinite to the original Bioshock a sizable amount. You could argue that Infinite is its own game, and it should be judged on its own merits. It's not set in Rapture, it's not the same story, and its themes and messages are almost completely different. Which, granted, is a somewhat fair assessment. But what I want you to keep in mind is that this game lost all right not to be compared to Bioshock when it slapped the name on the title. Also, the game is made up by mostly the same team, the gameplay and narrative template is very similar, and most importantly, it was written and directed by Ken Levine. If you got a problem with that, fine, but I feel it's a fair comparison to make. And with that, Bioshock 1's messages were pretty great. It perfectly utilised its setting and artistic medium to say a wide variety of things, and it wasn't anything bland or generic like the perils of addiction or anything cookie cutter like that. It took the rather niche philosophy of objectivism and perfectly deconstructed it. It's not that groundbreaking or anything, but it didn't need to be. The fact that the ideology was relatively unknown gave the creators a lot of room to dissect it without worrying about huge backlash or anything like that. Hell, if you wanted to, you could take Bioshock's message and apply it to any other political ideology and spin the game as commentary on taking a political belief to its most extreme. In addition, Bioshock 1's commentary on choice in gaming was relatively subtle. If you didn't know what the "would you kindly" twist was all about, then it would just be a really good twist on the previously established narrative. It also helped that it wasn't overbearing. It didn't bog the story down and was just another thing pretentious nerds such as myself could fawn over. So what's Bioshock Infinite's message of American exceptionalism like? Not that great. You could say that the reason I didn't respond heavily to this theme is because I'm not American, but to that I would say that the original Red Dead Redemption, which is slightly similar to Infinite in terms of themes and motifs, really got to me, and I loved the theme of idealism of the American frontier as well as its critiques of Western civilization. I'm not an American, but I got so much out of that game, and I walked away from it with a different perspective on American history.
Natives. Yes, they've lost their land, but they've gained access to heaven.
The game had such a potent message and speaks to anyone who knows anything about America. But in Infinite, this element of the game had little to no impact on me. Things that the game builds up to attempt to ground this theme either fall flat or they fail to really develop. Like for example, the worship of the Founding Fathers. It's the first thing you see when you properly enter Columbia, and they just never do anything with it afterwards. I get that it's meant to be a reference to how America was considered to be a land intended for God's people, hence all the racist iconography in the city's name, Columbia, which is a reference to the national personification that was created in 1738. And whilst it is neat symbolism, I guess, it isn't used for anything other than that. It's shown to you as if it's something that you should direct your attention towards, but it's never brought up again. And that's basically what everything else boils down to for me. Symbolism. Some of it's cool and the way certain parts of it are implemented tickled me a little, but it doesn't further the theme at all. To be honest, I don't even know what the theme is. From what I got from playing it as well as watching videos analysing it, Bioshock Infinite is meant to be a deconstruction of American idealism, exceptionalism, and the path that led to America's colonization. But that's where it ends. I don't get what it's deconstructing, I don't understand what it's trying to say. The only thing I can dissect from it is that America has built itself upon the exploitation of minorities, such as African Americans, Chinese, the Irish, and Native Americans. And nobody is denying America's past with racism and the exploitation of minorities. The last few decades have been America attempting to reconcile and tear down this bigoted past. But what is the game adding to this? Nothing. I can't for the life of me think of a single thing the game is attempting to say other than what I previously mentioned. It's so frustrating, because I want to get something out of the game, and I can't help but feel as though there is some kind of message to the game, but I can't just find it. In Bioshock 1, almost every element of the game was used to forward its message. For example, the plasmids and little sisters were representative of the dangers of giving scientists absolute freedom. The powers of the people upgrade stations were once again there to show the freedoms the people of Rapture had. Due to the political system of objectivism, even the circus of value vending machines were built to allow for free trade, which objectivism allowed. Bioshock Infinite doesn't do that, but still shoves in purposeful elements of the original Bioshock, not to further a theme or idea, but to make for consistency among the games. At worst, it contradicts the themes the game's trying to push. Why would a nation of ultra-nationalist Christians allow for people to gain godlike abilities? Also, I found the racism side of the game to be lacking. Whilst the intro cinematic never fails to get a rise out of me, I found it mostly served as a lazy way to get you to hate Columbia and not feel bad when massacring every single citizen you come across. Right after the raffle where you see that Columbia is racist, Booker mercilessly kills a police officer, then proceeds to barrel through the city, killing everything and anyone in his path in some of the most ruthless ways possible. I want to be eased into the problems of this city, not told it's bad within the first couple of minutes. Rapture you grew to hate, because as the game progressed you saw Andrew Ryan's corruption from idealist philosopher and businessman to a blind psychopath who has lost sight of what made his city great in the first place. It's a gradual transition and you're not told to hate it just because they capture children and turn them into demons. At no point does Bioshock Infinite attempt to humanize the society. All the civilians talk about is either Comstock, the Vox Populi, or races they hate.
Changing. People don't know their place anymore.
Tell me about it. An Oriental stopped me on the street and asked me for the time. Just like that. There should be a law. I think there is.
In addition, every single character who's meant to further the themes just comes across as incredibly two-dimensional. Take a look at how they present the first racist nationalist the game shows you.
Come on! Are you gonna throw it? Or are you taking your coffee black these days?
Wow, real in depth there. Thanks for showing us the complex conversation of race relations and exploitation in America through this goofy asshole with the top hat and handlebar mustache named Jeremiah. There's something to be said about using stereotypes to forward a message. Almost all of Bioshock's original villains were stereotypes. Steinman was a crazy doctor scientist whose work drove him mad, Sander Kern was a psychopath artist, and Fontaine was a typical 1940s mob boss. They worked because depth was applied to them, as we saw their downfall from respectable men of their craft to madmen due to the lack of laws imposed on them because of objectivism. So it worked there as we see how objectivism changes the scientist, the artist, and the con man. But what good comes from telling a story about racism through stereotypes? Because the entire idea of racism being a thing in the first place is based off of stereotypes. So making something opposed to the concept of racism by using stereotypes kind of just goes against your entire message. I wish they had developed it more than just, man, exploiting races is bad. However, I am aware that when it comes to writing something like this, then you're walking on eggshells. On the one hand, I want to see a more visceral depiction of racism and xenophobia to help drive the theme home, but on the other, I recognise that Bioshock Infinite is a video game, and that it has to be both fun and appeal to a larger audience to make back its budget. So trying to create a horrific depiction of racism in America while also appeasing the production company is an incredibly difficult task. That being said, I do still think it's underdeveloped, weak, and not as strong and purposeful as the original Bioshock. I mentioned at the beginning of the review that I found the combat to be fun, and I stand by that. The guns feel satisfying to shoot, the superpowers are fun to experiment with, and the Terran skyline system make for unique gameplay and help its flow. However, despite this, the enemies themselves are not fun to fight. These aren't Fallout 76 levels of lobotomites, but they're not quite the godsend elites from Halo. None of the enemies use unique strategies. Melee enemies rush you 100% of the time, ranged enemies will always stay in the same spot and let you attack them like my rotting frail grandmother, and the enemies that use vigors are just annoying. The fireman is too much of a bullet sponge, and whilst it does have cool abilities like being able to throw napalm grenades, can be easily incapacitated with Buck and Bronco, negating any kind of threat they once were. The Patriots are bullet sponges as well. I mean, sure, they do a lot of damage, but if you just hit them with a shot jockey, then they short out, allowing for ample killing.
We came up with this concept called the heavy hitters, who are enemies that are sort of used to not just be more powerful, but also to augment the abilities of the more traditional Bioshock enemies. You're going to come across them in certain areas of the game, and they're going to provide a really unique challenge.
Bioshock's AI wasn't perfect, but the enemies felt at least somewhat intelligent. When damaged, splicers would run to a healing station to heal themselves. Some would set up turrets, hide behind cover, attempt to outnumber you. Houdini splicers were challenging at long range and difficult to take out with ranged weapons due to their teleport ability, but at close range you could easily deal with them with a shotgun or the wrench. And spider splicers would attempt to outsmart you by flipping around or jumping up to the ceiling for their own self-preservation and to confuse the player. Infinite has none of that. Even the game's big enemies, the handyman, who are at the forefront of the marketing, pale in comparison to the big daddies. You don't have to implement strategy when it comes to fighting them. Sure, you can place traps in the map, I get that, but since the level design is so open and the enemies barely move, you have absolutely no reason to use them. If you jump around, use the shock jockey and shoot them with the shotgun, then you're golden. The level design also doesn't help this. I'm aware that Columbia is in the sky, so it has to be more open to the player or else it would defeat the purpose of the concept, but the AI they ended up using is a lot more suited to the claustrophobic, tight, confined layout of the first game. That's what made combat more engaging in the first game in my opinion. Despite the series only consisting of 3 games, Bioshock has a very clearly defined identity and several core components that define a Bioshock game, which Infinite acknowledges through Elizabeth's monologue about the multiverse and its constants and variables. Those being that
There's always a lighthouse. There's always a man. There's always a city.
So that's the Bioshock staple and narrative template. An effective and atmospheric intro, a city themed around a political ideology with splashes of science fiction, and finally, the man, who is meant to be the antagonist of each game. In Bioshock 1 we had Andrew Ryan and Frank Fontaine, both great and effective in their own right. Andrew Ryan is in my opinion one of, if not the greatest video game characters of all time. He had a presence that you just couldn't escape. Every time I saw Rapture, I saw him. His grubby little objectivist fingers were all over the damn place. You heard him through the speakers echoing throughout Rapture's empty halls. His ideas were exemplified throughout the game world. The splicers, the Circus of Valleys, the Little Sisters and Big Daddies, it all led back to Ryan. It's also helped by his dialogue being so great. Every time he spoke, I couldn't help but be engaged. His speech in the intro instantly catches your attention and it's so memorable. I could recite to you his entire speech without looking at prior word for word.
Is a man not entitled to the sweat of his brow? No, says the man in Washington, it belongs to the poor. No, says the man in the Vatican, it belongs to God. No, says the man in Moscow, it belongs to everyone. I rejected those answers. Instead, I chose something different. I chose the impossible. I chose Rapture.
His ideology of objectivism was flawed and doomed to fail, but also understandable and appealed to everyone to some degree. I can't tell you the amount of times somebody says that a man should be entitled to the sweat of his brow. It helped to ground him, and also shows us how he was able to gain such a following of objectivists who wholeheartedly believe in the Great Change. Despite being a villain and somebody who the player is encouraged to hate, you couldn't help but feel bad for the guy. He's sort of presented as a figure who fell from grace. A man who had a dream but had it fall to ruin due to the sacrifice of his own ideals. A man who had lost everything. A man who had his own son be kidnapped and forced into becoming a slave to the parasites. He was so captivating and sympathetic. He could kill 50 wives and sons of Irish revolutionaries. And you still couldn't help but feel a little saddened when you bashed his brains in against your will. It's made even more upsetting when you discover that you were his son. Fontaine, while not as captivating as Ryan and is even laughable at points with his corny mobster voice, baby, wee baby Patrick, was still a pretty good secondary antagonist. Like Ryan, he had presence. Almost every character you met talked about him, and each one feared him to some degree. The audio logs built him up as the kingpin of Rapture, pulling everyone's strings and assisting in the collapse. He set in motion most of the events of the game. Without him, there wouldn't be a game. He funded Tenenbaum's discovery of Adam, leading to plasmids and the Little Sisters, two of the game's major mechanics. He led the smuggling ring in Fontaine Fisheries, leading to Ryan's implementation of the death penalty and his suppression of Rapture's free will. Afterwards, he created your character, faked his death, taking on the moniker Atlas, and started the civil war in Rapture. Fontaine is responsible for all the spinning plates the narrative is holding up, and you're just waiting for that moment when all the plates come crashing down in the twist, where you discover that he was the guy on your radio the whole time, and that the entire story up until that point was all a part of his intricate plan to take over Rapture. And the way this information is revealed to you is so well done, tense, and really gets you engaged. He was intimidating, had presence, and stuck in your head throughout the game's story. Comstock's got none of that. After you meet up with Elizabeth, he lacks any sort of presence. At the beginning, he has some air of intimidation. The Columbia military bow down to him when he tells them to stand down. He threatens Booker and shows that he's aware of his past.
I know why you've come, false shepherd. I see every sin that blackens your soul. Wounded knee, the Pinkertons, the drink, the gambling, and of course, Anna.
And he has one of his followers burn themselves alive to try and kill Booker. But after that, he's resigned to nothing but a threatening voice and or a statue. He doesn't do anything intimidating, and all he says are spooky proverbs.
The seed of the prophet shall sit the throne and drown in flame the mountains of man.
Or asking for Elizabeth to return to him. It doesn't make him a good villain, it just makes him an asshole with an intercom. In the middle of the game, I actually forgot he was in there. The only thing that reminds you of him being there are a couple of statues and a few audio logs. And the audio logs are so boring to listen to. In all of them, he speaks in proverb about stupid stuff I don't care about. I'm not intrigued in learning his ideology and why he is who he is, because he runs a society of racists. So there isn't anything for you to do in the way of motivation, because it's such an unsympathetic ideology. And wouldn't you know it, he has an unsympathetic motivation.
What exactly was the great emancipator emancipating the Negro from? From his daily bread, from the nobility of honest work, from wealthy patrons who sponsored them from cradle to grave, from clothing and shelter. And what have they done with their freedom? Why, go to Finkton and you shall find out. No animal is born free, except the white man. And it is our burden to care for the rest of creation.
He's boring to listen to. He's just a religious zealot, nothing more, nothing less. Not even the twist later in the game expands on this. I was never interested, and I didn't care when I bashed his geriatric brains in and drowned him in a bird bath, because all he was a threatening voice and a boring zealot. In addition, I don't understand his motivation. Andrew Ryan and Frank Fontaine had clearly defined and simple motivations. Ryan wanted to build his perfect utopia and make Rapture a paradise for the working man, and Fontaine wanted power and to run Rapture. Simple but understandable. What's Comstock's motivation? Well, he wants Elizabeth to take his place after he dies so that she can burn New York down to the ground. Why? I don't know. It's never explained as to why he wants to do this, so then he just becomes a comical supervillain as a result. Also, it really annoys me how it's never clear as to whether or not he believes in his prophecy. A lot of his dialogue implies that he made up his prophecy in order to gain power. For example, the revelation that his ability to see into the future is just him looking into alternate dimensions. But then other things point to him actually believing it. It's just so irritating and inconsistent. In addition to Comstock, we also have a few secondary villains as well, those being Daisy Fitzroy, Jeremiah Fink, and Cornelius Slate, most of which are also not very good. Daisy Fitzroy comes close to being a good character for me. She's built up as a revolutionary who wholeheartedly believes in her cause for equality in Colombia, and has an incredibly sympathetic motivation. Also, her audio diaries are legitimately engaging and good to listen to.
The one thing people need to learn is that fear is the antidote to fear. I don't want to be a part of their world. I don't want to be a part of their culture, their politics, their people. The sun is setting on their world, and soon enough, all they gonna see is the dark.
Her introductory cutscene is great. The way she commands the scene, her voice acting and her monologue, all really good. I like it. At this point, I'm interested, I'm engaged. But then they ruin it by turning her into an evil child murderer. Her quest for equality just turns into killing literally everyone just to give the player another enemy to kill. It's never developed or explained as to why Daisy changes her motivation. And yes, I know that they explain it in the DLC, that she wasn't actually going to kill the child, and only did it to further Elizabeth's changing character. But that scene in the DLC only serves to retcon her act in the base game, because they probably realised, oh yeah, we didn't actually get Daisy motivation for putting that child at gunpoint. But even if we are to assume Ken Levine already had this laid out as an explanation before the DLC, that still doesn't really explain why she orders the Vox Populi to kill literally every person in Colombia. I really don't like Fink. There's nothing to him. He doesn't have any interesting personality, he isn't memorable, and he doesn't command a scene like Andrew Ryan or Daisy Fitzroy. At least with Comstock I liked some of his dialogue.
But the Archangel revealed something else. Beware, Prophet. Beware the false shepherd Booker DeWitt, for he shall be as a wall between her and destiny.
Why?
But Fink just doesn't have that. He's supposed to be a representation of the traditional American entrepreneur, but I just don't get anything out of that because he's such a goofball stereotype that doesn't have any depth behind him. You may be wondering why I'm complaining about Fink being a stereotype, as Sander Cohen and Dr. Steinman from Bioshock 1 are stereotypes as well, and I think they're great characters. But the difference between the execution of characters such as Fink and, say, Sander Cohen, is that Cohen had a past, a progression of how he fell from grace. We are given and shown explanation as to how he became who he is. His audio log serves to show not only his past, but also his eccentric personality and worldview. We know why he does what he does. We know what role he plays in the game's theme of objectivism. His role in this tells us of how objectivism views art. In addition, he has a character. There are things about him you can talk about. I reckon I could probably write an essay about Sander Cohen. But Fink in comparison is just so two-dimensional. There is next to nothing about his character you can talk about other than him being a symbol for American industry. It also doesn't help that he falls into the camp of being comically evil, which many other characters in this game fall under. Lastly, we have Cornelius Slate, who I actually kind of like. I think he is the only case of consistently good antagonist in this game, and on top of that, he is the only character that brings forth a message about the game's themes. Slate serves as a representation of all of America's soldiers and the heroes who fight on the battlefield for their country, only for America to cover up for the sake of giving America a more heroic symbol to get behind. The game uses this character to actually say something about America's tendency to censor and bury the past, and I for one really like it. He's also a good character disconnected from the game's themes. He oozes with sadness and cynicism due to the death of all his friends and Comstock's willingness to bury their history.
Comstock led the Colombian troops to Peking.
Comstock wasn't there! The Boxers took my eye and 30 of my friends! Is there even a stone to mark that sacrifice?
He's a man with nothing left to lose, and he's a former hero with hardly anybody left to remember his battles, which is why he's comforted when Booker chooses to kill him, as it shows him that there are some left to remember him as a soldier, and that even Comstock couldn't erase Booker's past. I really like the ending, which I know sounds somewhat misleading given the title of the section, but just hear me, my cute little sluts. The ending has so many parts to it that really stick out in my head, and some of the twists that are present here really stick out in my head. The moment wherein Elizabeth teleports you to the open section of Rapture is a fun, fan-servicey moment and is really well executed. I love how when you're transported into Rapture, the screen is mostly taken up by Songbird, so your attention is drawn to him, which makes the reveal that much more impactful. On top of that, you have the great reincorporation of La Mer. It's a neat, impactful scene, though I'm not a big fan of Booker's line here.
City at the bottom of the ocean. Ridiculous.
Following that, Elizabeth opens up a door to the multiverse and explains to Booker the idea of infinite realities and timelines with branching choices in a somewhat consistent framework. Or in other words,
constants and variables.
which is meant to be a slight remark to the nature of video games. It's a cute little fourth wall break. I like Ken Levine's meta-commentary on choice in video games that can be seen throughout his work. Infinite, also in the spirit of things, dives into this concept and uses the choice mechanics and the multiverse framework to mock the idea of player choice. It's one of the themes of the game that I don't particularly mind. I mean, sure, it doesn't necessarily say anything about player choice other than that you don't have any, but it doesn't need to. It's just a neat little thing that you can get out of the game. It also helps that it doesn't attempt to say anything, unlike the theme of American exceptionalism. Moving on, we start to see more of Booker's past. Before this point, Booker's backstory has been mostly ambiguous, so it's satisfying to finally peer into what's been teased by the character previously.
So, Mr. DeWitt, is there a woman in your life?
There was. She died.
How?
Giving birth.
Wow. You have a child?
No.
Then we get into an actually really epic twist. We find out that Booker actually had a daughter called Anna, who he exchanged in order for Comstock to pay for his gambling debts. That is such a great twist. It subverts the entire story of the game and makes you think back in retrospect about the rest of the game. It's a lot like Bioshock 1's twist in that way. Also, before this point, we've had Anna be mentioned by name, but never told who or what she is. The revelation that she's Booker's infant daughter is a great way to create shock and awe in the audience, and both of these plot points completely recontextualize the game and make you ask more questions. Afterwards, you're given this great scene that's really well done and impactful. I'm just gonna play it and let it speak for itself.
You mad? Give her back, you son of a bitch!
It's ready! No!
No! No,
Shut
no, no!
down the machine!
No!
Shut it
Anna!
down! Shut down the
Anna!
machine! Now do it!
Give me back my daughter! No!
Look, I'm gonna be honest. I cried. Everything about it is so well executed. The music, the voice acting, the animation, the setting, it all combines to create a beautiful scene. We're also given another great twist in the form of Elizabeth being revealed to be Booker's daughter. Ken Levine seems to be obsessed with the relationship between father and daughter. It's one of the main themes in Bioshock 1, which is expressed through several characters such as the Big Daddies and Little Sisters, Jack, Andrew Ryan, Sushong, and Frank Fontaine. That theme seems to have been carried over to Infinite, and is once again expressed through characters such as Booker and Elizabeth, Comstock and Songbird, another neat theme I like. You may be wondering why I entitled this segment The Ending and why it doesn't work, because so far I've only been singing its praises. But, my young little ringworms, if you recall earlier, I stated that every Bioshock game has a bad ending. They all tend to falter in the last act. After Bioshock 1's twist, the story just kind of meandered into video game fetch quests until you fight the Mylert King from Fallout 3 in a really anticlimactic showdown, only to end with either a decent yet cheesy ending or a generic bad ending. It's just sort of boring and anticlimactic because the game has already reached its high point and doesn't know where to go from there. If you can't tell what I'm getting at, I'm saying that Bioshock Infinite is starting to meander. Elizabeth insists that Booker and her kill Comstock so that he never exists across all timelines. I don't particularly know why. I know her motivation is that he tortured her, so she wants revenge, but why does she want all of them dead? They killed the one who tortured her, so why kill every other one?
What are we doing here? Comstock's dead. We can just go on with our lives. You don't need
Dead? You mean like Chenlit? Like Lady Comstock? No. He is alive in a million worlds. It's not over because the Prophet is dead. It will only be over when he never even lived in the first place.
Yeah, but why though? For all you know, you were just in a universe where he's evil, and in the others he's really nice. Also, as established in an earlier section of the game, they say that if you kill one version of somebody, all alternate versions will become crazy as a result. So therefore every other Comstock is negated as they've gone insane. So you really don't have to do anything. This becomes even more stupid when we get to the penultimate plot twist. That being that you were Comstock the whole time. Whoa, oh my god. This doesn't make any sense, and I'm going to explain why. Firstly, Booker and Comstock look and sound nothing alike. Let's do a little side-by-side comparison. Booker has green eyes and a slightly more upturned pig nose. Comstock has blue eyes and more crooked witch nose. Also, I'm aware that they have to use different voice actors in order to make the twist slightly more unexpected, but if you want to make the twist slightly more satisfying, it would help to give them a similar accent or something, because Booker and Comstock sound nothing alike.
Elizabeth, why is your mother a ghost?
As a boy, I had a dog named Bill.
Hell, I think Troy Baker could probably pull off Comstock. He's proven that he's got a good range of voices. He could probably do another voice for Comstock that sounds different, yet similar. I would find it easier to suspend my disbelief in terms of Comstock's voice and appearance if they didn't make him Booker in the DLC. He's got his voice and appearance there. Why doesn't he have that in the base game? It's also not helped by Comstock and Booker being nothing alike. They don't share any personality traits or mannerisms. The Booker DeWitt we see in the game does not seem like the type of person who devoutly follows a faith. Nor does he seem the kind of person to declare himself a prophet and create a false prophecy.
Mr. DeWitt, Comstock. I've read about him. They say he can see the future.
Give a man a little power, he falls in all kinds of love with himself.
It also makes Columbia make less sense. Why would Booker want to create Columbia? What drive would he have to create a flying city? Unless he really did see the Archangel Columbia as he claims he did. But once again, we're never told if this actually happened, as the game leaves it up to interpretation as to whether or not he believes in this prophecy. In addition, why would he name himself Comstock following his just transfiguration? To highlight my point here, I'm going to use a clip from Spookington's media video on Bioshock Infinite's ending, so he says pretty much everything I have to say on this matter.
First off, the name. The game would have you believe that Booker took the name Zachary Hill Comstock following his epiphany, a sort of personal religious transfiguration. Except religious transfiguration doesn't work that way. It's not the witness protection program. In the same way that Abram became Abraham, the name's change is not just symbolic, but specifically symbolic, representative of the individual's new position in God's plan. While it can be argued that Zachary is a corruption of the Old Testament's very minor prophet Zechariah, the name Comstock is plain old Welsh. All this is to say that a person who believes himself to have experienced religious transfiguration may take the name Elijah Truthbringer, but would not take the name Dirk Stevenson.
See, it don't make no sense. Lastly, what motivation would Booker have to become a racist nationalist? Throughout the entire game, Booker has regarded Columbia's racist nationalism as immoral and inhumane.
Why don't you give her a throw?
Son of a bitch.
Wait!
Why would Comstock take up such racist views? It's implied by an audio log from Jeremiah Think that Comstock's racism was something he took up in order to come to terms with recruiting black convicts, but I still feel as though it would require a lot more than that to actually turn him racist. Other than things related to Booker and Comstock's character, the twist also don't make sense because, as I previously mentioned, the game establishes that if one version of somebody dies in one dimension, then another version of you in an alternate dimension would go insane due to the simultaneous state of both being alive and dead. And when Booker murders an alternate version of himself, absolutely nothing happens. So I guess that entire plot point was for nothing, and has absolutely no bearing on the plot. Finally, why does killing one Booker kill all the other Bookers? Interdimensional travel, doubling as time travel, is within my suspension of disbelief, but if you go back in time to one dimension and kill a Booker DeWitt there before his baptism, then in an alternate universe there is a Booker DeWitt who you didn't kill. If they explained in a brief line of dialogue that the Booker we play as is the prime Booker DeWitt, then I wouldn't question the fact that if he dies then all alternate versions would die as well. But they didn't do that, so it's just confusing. Also, there are other alternatives to stopping Comstock across all timelines than just murdering Booker and subsequently Elizabeth. Look, here are two possible alternatives they could have taken without killing themselves. Number 1. Prevent Booker from participating in the Wounded Knee Massacre. If he doesn't partake in the massacre, then he has no need to seek baptism, transforming him into Comstock. Number 2. Kill the Lutesses. It's explained in an audio diary from Rosalind Lutess that before she met him, Comstock was only a preacher in the street. She collaborated with him and they built Columbia. Rosalind created the Lutess particle, allowing it to float, and Comstock made talks with Congress and recruited citizens. If you kill Rosalind, then Comstock can never lead Columbia. Therefore, Comstock cannot steal Elizabeth, kill Lady Comstock, the Vox Populi would never be founded, and Elizabeth doesn't kill New York. There is no reason to go through a drowning Booker at his baptism, other than to complete his character arc and allow for him to receive redemption for his past actions. But something tells me that doesn't really matter to Booker and Elizabeth. Also, another pet peeve I have with this ending: how come Elizabeth didn't die and survived into the DLC? At least have a bit of consistency. Bioshock Infinite is an incredibly flawed game. The gameplay has issues, the AI is lackluster, the villains are fairly mediocre, and the themes are poorly developed. The story has hella issues, and it pales in comparison to the majesty and beauty of its big daddy Bioshock 1. Everything I said so far may give off the impression to some of you that I hate this game, when in reality it couldn't be farther from the truth. I don't think that this game is smart, as many others have claimed for it to be. Whilst it doesn't have much to say in terms of themes, I feel it has a lot to offer as a character-driven story. When the game isn't focused on finding new things to shoot or having the villain spout nonsense, we're given great and potent story about a man who's lost everything and has nothing left in his life but debts to pay, and a lonely girl who has almost lost all hope making the transformation from a lamb to a woman. It's a heartfelt story past all the violence and racists, driven by incredible performances, dialogue and music. If Infinite removed the Bioshock name from the equation, thus getting rid of the hand-fisted message, superpowers and constant shooting, then Bioshock Infinite could have been a poignant, character-focused human story, exploring all the different strokes of humanity from the radical to the content. It feels as though it has a bit of an identity crisis in that way. One moment it wants to be about Booker and Elizabeth, then it's about Columbia, then it's about multiverses, and then it's about high adrenaline shooty gun fun. Lack of focus, missteps in narrative, clunky AI, stock villain, and a lack of a clear message when it acts as if it has one really holds this game back from getting a great score. But great leads, fun gameplay, atmosphere, music and dialogue, and touching bits and pieces of human drama is what prevents it from getting a low score.